She was just a trainee nurse in a small New York town, quiet, unnoticed, living paycheck to paycheck. But one winter night under a flickering streetlight, Emily Daniels stepped between three men and an elderly stranger. Seconds later, she was unconscious, bleeding on the pavement. She woke up in the same hospital where she once stayed late for patients no one visited. But this time it was her name being whispered. And one of those whispers came from a man in a dark suit the president knows. What happened next would turn her quiet life upside down and reveal the truth about the man she saved. From a silent street to the highest office in the land, this is the journey of a woman who never meant to be a hero. Emily Daniels had never been the kind of person to chase attention. She lived in the quiet, frost-laced town of Pine Hill, nestled in the foothills of upstate New York, where winters were long and street lamps flickered like old memories. At 26, she was still working on her nursing certification and splitting shifts as a trainee at Pine Hill Regional Medical Center, a place as modest as she was. With its outdated tile floors and faded posters about flu season, the hospital served the kind of people often forgotten in the bustle of bigger cities: retirees, veterans, working-class families scraping by. Emily fit right in. She had been raised just a few miles from the hospital in a tiny one-bedroom house that smelled like peppermint tea and hand sanitizer. Her mother, Marie Daniels, had been a hospice nurse for over 2 decades, the kind of woman who could hold a stranger's hand until the very last breath without flinching. Marie never had much, but she taught Emily the value of showing up, not for praise, not for glory, just because someone needed you. And Emily absorbed that lesson deep into her bones. She didn't drive a car; she couldn't afford one. Her apartment sat above a shuttered laundromat on Main Street, its radiator clicking and clanking, through the night like an old train struggling uphill. The furniture was all secondhand. Her coat had been sewn up twice at the elbows. And still every other Saturday she volunteered at the local shelter, dishing out soup with the same gentle smile she wore while taking vitals at the hospital. At work, she was the kind of nurse who remembered the names of patients others forgot. The war veteran with no visitors. She made time. The elderly woman afraid of the dark Emily sat bedside after hours until she drifted off to sleep. She brought coffee to the janitors when the night shifts got long, and once lent her winter boots to a coworker who'd come in soaked after missing the bus. No one told her to do any of it. She just did. Even her supervisors, while slow to offer her a permanent position, quietly relied on her. She was the extra pair of hands in an understaffed ward. The calm in the chaos of late-night emergencies. The quiet glue that held forgotten corners of the hospital together. And though she never complained, the truth was, Emily was tired. Tired of scrambling for rent. Tired of watching others get promoted while she remained in limbo. But even when her bank account dipped below zero, she never stopped showing up for others. She didn't believe in grand gestures. She believed in small ones, repeated daily kindness as a rhythm, not a performance. And that's why no one, not even Emily, could have predicted that a single moment on a winter night would change everything. Because real heroes don't see themselves that way. They just show up. The shift had run long again, as it often did for Emily Daniels. It was nearly midnight when she finally left Pine Hill Regional Medical Center, her stethoscope still around her neck, and her canvas bag slung over one shoulder. The January air bit through her coat like needles. Snow had started falling earlier that evening, dusting the sidewalks in a light crunching layer. The streetlights flickered weakly overhead, casting long shadows across the narrow road leading back to Main Street. She could have asked someone for a ride, but she never did. Emily liked the quiet of walking home at night, a habit formed over years of saving every penny. It gave her time to think, to exhale the weight of the hospital. Pine Hill was never exactly bustling, but this late the streets felt abandoned. Just the low hum of a vending machine outside the closed gas station and the rhythmic squeak of her boots on wet concrete kept her company. She had just passed the old community church, its steeple cloaked in snow, when she heard it. Voices, low, harsh, slurred. At first she thought it was just an argument, but when she turned the corner, what she saw stopped her cold. 3 men stood under a flickering street lamp, their bodies hunched close like shadows pressed together. At their center was an elderly man, his coat thin and frayed hands, shaking around a paper bag. One of the younger men shoved him hard in the chest, making him stumble back against the frozen brick wall. Another yanked at his sleeve, snarling something Emily couldn't make out, but the tone said enough. She froze. Her breath caught halfway between her lungs and throat. Everything in her body screamed to keep walking. Cross the street, pretend she didn't see. But Emily Daniels had never been able to look away. Not from a patient in pain, not from a stranger in need, and certainly not from this. Hey, she called out, her voice sharper than she thought possible. Leave him alone. The men turned. One of them, the tallest, wearing a dark knit cap and a patchy beard, stepped forward with a smirk. The kind of smirk that said he wasn't used to being challenged. Not here. Not by someone like her. Keep walking, nurse lady, he slurred. This ain't your business. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. But she didn't back away. She took a step closer, raising her voice again. He hasn't done anything to you. Let him go. The man nearest the older gentleman chuckled, the sound low and mean. What are you going to do, patch us up after another laugh? Another step forward, and then with no warning, one of them shoved her. Hard. Emily's feet slipped on the snowy curb. Her shoulder clipped the side of the dumpster. Then the world tilted and her head hit the pavement with a sickening crack. The street lamp flared above her, sending halos into her vision. She tasted blood. She couldn't move. The sound around her warped the echo of footsteps, a distant shout, the harsh breath of someone running. Then, silence. The men were gone. The old man, too. Only the cold remained, seeping up through her clothes as she lay there unmoving, blinking slowly at the swirling snow overhead. She might have faded completely if not for the man across the street. He had just closed his bookstore for the night, his hands full of receipts and keys when he heard the commotion. At first he thought it was just drunks shouting, Pine Hill had its share. But the moment he saw a body on the ground, he sprinted. Miss, can you hear me? He said, kneeling beside her. She blinked once, then her eyes rolled back. The man's hands shook as he dialed 911, yelling into the phone as he cradled her head gently off the concrete. She's bleeding, head wound, unconscious. Please just get here fast. He pulled off his jacket and draped it over her, trying to shield her from the wind. 2 minutes later, the sirens echoed through the narrow streets. A paramedic team from Pine Hill Regional rushed out as the ambulance skidded to a halt. One EMT paused mid-step. It's Emily, he whispered. They'd all seen her before, usually with a chart in her hand, walking fast between beds, always offering help. But tonight she was the one being lifted onto the stretcher. She's one of ours, someone said almost reverently. And as the red and blue lights painted the snowbanks, Emily Daniels disappeared into the ambulance. Unconscious, blood trailing from her temple, her breath shallow, while no one knew yet that the man she tried to protect had once worn the uniform of a United States Marine, and that a phone call had just been made that would change everything. The ambulance doors burst open with a hiss, and for a moment the world outside the ER stood still. Inside the white cocoon of the emergency vehicle, a voice called out sharp and urgent, head trauma. Female 20s, GCS dropping. It was only when the stretcher came into view that the night shift staff recognized her. Wait, is that someone's breath caught? A nurse dropped her pen, and then came the whisper that traveled like a pulse through the hospital. That's Emily. She wasn't just another patient on the board. She was family. Emily Daniels had walked these halls for years. Everyone knew her not because she made noise, but because she never failed to show up. She had offered warm coffee to sleep-deprived residents, stayed late for lonely patients, and helped the custodial crew mop up a spill once without saying a word. No job was too small. No kindness beneath her. Now she lay unconscious under the too bright trauma. Light's blood seeping from a wound near her temple, her jaw slack, her pulse faint. Dr. Khalid, the attending trauma physician, cursed softly under his breath. Get neuro on standby. And I want vitals every minute. He'd reviewed 1,000 trauma cases in his career, but never one that made his hands shake like this. The trauma room snapped into motion. 2 nurses prepped the IV lines. Another cut away her bloodied scrubs. A respiratory therapist checked her airway. Monitors beeped in rapid bursts, flashing stats that told everyone just how thin the thread was that held her to this world. Outside the doors, the staff began to gather. First came Rachel, a night nurse who once shared her break room sandwich with Emily when she forgot hers. Then the janitor Leo, who remembered how Emily had brought him cough drops during a brutal flu season. Next was the cafeteria manager, Maria, whose daughter Emily had tutored quietly between shifts. No one had to call them. They just came. And in that tight hallway outside Trauma 1, a quiet vigil formed not out of obligation, but out of love. Not loud, not dramatic, just presence. Just people who had once been seen by Emily when no one else looked. Inside the trauma bay, the rhythm of work was constant. Nurses moved like clockwork. The suction line cleared blood from her scalp. Saline flowed. Her name was said over and over, not clinically, but like a plea. Emily, come on. You're not done yet. You've helped everyone. Let us help you now. And between the orders and updates came the memories. One nurse remembered how Emily covered her shift during her son's surgery, no questions asked. An orderly recalled the time she slipped him her only $5 bill when he couldn't afford dinner. Someone else whispered about how she once hand-stitched a baby blanket for a patient who didn't have family. Her kindness had been a thread, invisible and strong, weaving through them all. And now they were the net trying to catch her before she slipped away. Near the end of the hall, a figure sat silently, the man she had tried to protect. He wore a coat too thin for the weather, his hands folded stiffly in his lap. No one asked him to move. No one questioned who he was. There was something in his eyes, a grief, a reverence that made people step softly around him. He didn't speak, but he didn't leave either. His name was still unknown to them, but in his posture, there was a story of debt of gratitude of a man who had seen war but never expected to be saved by a girl in scrubs. As the hours passed, the trauma team worked without pause. A CT scan confirmed a skull fracture and a slow subdural bleed. The call was made to prep her for neurosurgery. Rachel leaned close before they wheeled Emily away. She reached for her hand, cold limp, but still warm with life. "You're not going anywhere, Emily," she whispered. "Not on our watch." And with that, the doors swung open once more, spilling Emily into the next chapter of the fight. Not hers alone now, but one shared by every soul she had quietly lifted over the years. For hours he didn't speak. The old man sat rigidly in the corner of the ICU waiting room, hands clasped together, back straight, despite the fatigue in his limbs. His coat was worn at the sleeves, his boots scuffed and weathered, but there was a discipline in him, quiet, unmistakable. It wasn't just the way he sat, it was the way he listened, the way he waited. No one knew his name. They just knew he had been there when Emily Daniels fell. When the neurosurgeon came out with an update, stable for now, but delicate, the man simply closed his eyes for a moment, as though whispering something to someone long gone. Then he stood slowly, deliberately, and stepped outside. No one stopped him. What no one saw was what he did next. He pulled out a cracked flip phone from his pocket, an antique in today's world, and pressed a number without hesitation. It was a number he hadn't called in years. The line rang twice. Then a voice answered, clipped and alert. "Operations Command, who's calling?" "This is Colonel Henry Keene," he said, voice steady. "Authorization, Bravo Zulu, Echo 3. I need to speak to Director Pierce. Tell him it's about an incident involving a civilian nurse." "And me." The line went dead for a moment. Then another voice came through, older, slower, but sharper than steel. "Colonel Keene, it's been a while." "I need a favor," Keene replied. "You're not one to ask, I know. But this one matters. She's in critical condition because she stepped in when no one else did. Saved me from a beating. Probably worse." Silence. "Then what's her name?" "Emily Daniels." Within 15 minutes, a secured message left Fort Belvoir. 10 minutes after that, a contact at the West Wing was briefed. And by dawn, an unmarked black SUV was en route to Pine Hill Regional Medical Center. Back in the waiting room, Keene returned to his seat, this time leaning slightly forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His breathing was tight, his eyes distant, because Henry Keene was more than a homeless man. He was once a decorated Marine colonel, a man who had commanded soldiers in Kandahar, written field protocols used by embassy security teams, and for 6 years stood guard over the President of the United States as part of the elite White House security attaché. He had shaken hands with world leaders, held classified briefings in bunkers the public never knew existed, and now he owed his life to a young nurse who hadn't known or cared who he was. The military taught him many things: strategy, silence, loyalty. But it was Emily's unthinking courage that shook him most. She'd acted without rank, without recognition. And Henry Keene knew something very few people truly understood. When someone like that steps forward, the nation should step with them. The snow had stopped falling by the time the black SUV rolled into the hospital parking lot. It made no sound except the crunch of salt beneath its tires. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a quiet vehicle with government plates and windows too dark to see through. A man in a dark gray suit stepped out. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself like someone who didn't waste time. His coat was buttoned, his shoes polished, and under his arm was a weathered leather folder sealed in a navy envelope with a gold-embossed crest. Without asking directions, he walked straight through the front doors of Pine Hill Regional Medical Center, past the reception desk and toward the administrator's office. Security didn't stop him. The nurses didn't question him. It was as if everyone instinctively knew this wasn't someone you delayed. 10 minutes later, Dr. Khalid, still in his scrubs, knocked on the ICU door and stepped inside. Emily Daniels lay there propped, slightly upright, her skin pale, but her eyes slowly, steadily opening. Machines blinked softly behind her. Her breath came in short, careful draws. Rachel sat at her bedside, a hand gently resting on Emily's forearm. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're back." Emily blinked again, her eyes adjusting to the lights, the room, the voices. Then in the doorway, another figure entered. Colonel Henry Keene. Gone was the battered coat. Someone had given him a clean shirt, military style. He walked slowly but upright, now his hands clasped behind his back, his face solemn. He approached her bedside, pausing a foot away. "You don't know me," he said softly. "Not really, but I know you." Emily tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She blinked again, confused. "I failed to protect people," once Keene continued, voice low and steady, "in a place where protection was my only job. I carried that with me for years. But that night you didn't hesitate. You stepped in. You saved me, a man you didn't know, a man who didn't look worth saving." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Keene gave a small smile. "You reminded me what honor looks like." Behind him, the man in the suit entered silently and handed the sealed folder to the attending nurse. Rachel opened it carefully, then placed it in Emily's hands. Her name was at the top. Below it, an official request from the President of the United States. And beneath that, a single sentence that made her breath hitch in her throat. "The nation has not forgotten you." Emily stared at the letter in her lap, her fingers trembling as they traced the raised seal at the top, the emblem of the office of the President of the United States. The paper felt thick and expensive, far removed from the life she knew. But her name was there in perfect black ink. Not Miss, not trainee. Just Emily Grace Daniels. She hadn't spoken since the folder was handed to her. Her voice was still weak, but the silence wasn't from pain. It was disbelief. Rachel sat beside her, quietly holding a glass of water Emily had forgotten to drink. Colonel Keene stood near the window, his arms crossed behind him like he was back on duty. And the man in the suit, Agent Nathan Pierce, simply watched with the calm focus of someone used to history being made in hushed hospital rooms. Emily finally looked up from the letter, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Is this real?" Pierce gave a single nod. "The President read the full report this morning. He asked that this be delivered by hand." Emily blinked, then looked back down, rereading the paragraph for the third time. "You have been a light in dark places, not just to one man, but to everyone you've served. In recognition of your courage and compassion, I am formally inviting you to accept the position of honorary head nurse of the White House Medical Wing. This appointment carries full benefits, relocation support, and a permanent role serving those who serve our nation." Attached was a separate letter, more personal, handwritten, not typed, "Dear Ms. Daniels, I don't know where people like you find the strength to stand up when it's easiest to walk away. But because you did, you reminded all of us what character truly means. We need more of that in Washington. We need more of you. Welcome home, the President." Emily's eyes welled with tears. Rachel leaned closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "You did this, Em, just by being who you are." "There's more," Agent Pierce added gently, retrieving a small envelope from inside his coat. He opened it and handed over a set of keys, plain unmarked, attached to a silver tag engraved with a house number. "A furnished townhouse in Arlington. Mortgage-free, and a vehicle yours outright. You'll also receive lifetime VA medical benefits under special civilian provisions." Emily stared at the keys. Her whole life she had lived paycheck to paycheck, walked to work in patched-up shoes, stayed in a town too small to dream beyond survival. And now, this. A job, a home, a future. Not because she asked, not because she expected, but because she acted. And the world had taken notice. The faded stairs creaked beneath her feet as Emily climbed them one last time. Her apartment, tucked above the old laundromat on Pine Hills Main Street, smelled like brewed tea and old wood, the scent of a life lived quietly. She paused at the door, her hand on the chipped knob, taking in the familiar scratch marks where her keys always missed the lock. Inside, everything was just as she'd left it. The thrift store armchair by the window, the tiny kettle on the stove that whistled louder than necessary, the mismatched mugs drying on a towel near the sink. She walked in slowly, eyes scanning the small space, every item holding a memory. The letter from the president still sat in her bag, along with the keys to a new home and a future she never imagined. But here was the life she'd built from nothing. She folded her scrubs carefully into a worn canvas duffel, along with the stethoscope she'd used for 3 years. She didn't own much, some books, a few photo frames, a patchwork quilt her mother had sewn during chemo. Packing didn't take long, but the act felt heavy, like every drawer she closed was a goodbye. Before leaving town, she made one final stop. The soup kitchen buzzed with its usual rhythm, the clang of ladles against metal pots, the low hum of conversation, the hiss of steam from boiling water. When she stepped inside, heads turned, then silence, then movement. Emily, a child, cried out, racing toward her. Soon she was surrounded volunteers, guests, kids. Mrs. Kellerman, the director, hugged her so tightly that Emily nearly dropped her bag. "I heard, sweet girl." We all did. "You're going to do so much good." "I wasn't trying to do anything big," Emily murmured. Mrs. Kellerman just smiled. "That's what makes it so big." They shared a meal, simple and warm. One man passed her a crayon drawing his daughter had made. Another woman with tearful eyes pressed a tiny silver cross into her palm for protection. "Like you gave us," she whispered. As she walked home, snow falling softly again, her mind drifted into a quiet montage, holding the hand of a scared teenager in the ER, buying coffee for the night janitor when no one else noticed him, singing softly to a dementia patient until sleep took her, reading a story to a child in the waiting room whose mother was in surgery, lending her coat to a stranger in the rain. All the moments that had never made the news, never been posted, never been recorded, except they had in hearts. By the time she closed her apartment door behind her for the last time, the rooms felt different. Not empty, full. She placed a note on the table for the next tenant. "Leave it better than you found it. That's all that matters." And with that, Emily Daniels walked into the snow towards something new, but never away from who she truly was. The air in Washington felt different, crisp, dignified, as if even the wind had learned to move with intention. Emily stood quietly at the edge of the White House garden, a fitted navy coat wrapped around her, and her hair pulled back into a modest knot. She could feel her heart beating beneath the fabric, not from fear but awe. Rows of folding white chairs stretched across the manicured lawn, filled with cabinet officials, military leaders, and medical professionals in formal dress. The garden bloomed behind them, tulips, roses, trimmed hedges, but the real attention was focused at the podium near the south lawn. A soft voice beside her broke the moment. "You ready?" Colonel Henry Keene asked. Emily turned. He looked different now, sharp suit, shoulders straight, but the same eyes. The ones she'd seen filled with fear that night. The ones that now held quiet pride. "Not really," she admitted. He gave a small chuckle. "That's the right answer." Then from across the crowd came the subtle hush of attention shifting. The president had arrived. He approached the podium with calm ease, pausing for a moment as he looked over the crowd, then turned his gaze to Emily standing just to the side. Cameras flashed silently. The live broadcast streamed to millions. But in that moment, everything felt intimate, like the entire country had leaned in to listen. Today, the president began, "We do not honor a general or senator or a celebrity. We honor someone who reminds us of something this nation too often forgets, that America's strength has never come from its titles, its towers, or its wealth." He paused. His voice grew gentler. "Our strength comes from its people, from quiet courage, from those who do what is right not because it's easy, but because someone had to. He turned toward Emily. She didn't know who she was protecting. She didn't ask for thanks. She stepped into danger for a man she didn't know, and in doing so reminded all of us what it means to be American. There was a moment of stillness. Then he gestured toward Keene. Colonel Keene stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching softly on the gravel. In his hand, a small polished badge, silver-etched with the seal of the White House Medical Unit. He stood before Emily. "For your courage," he said, voice clear, "and for the care you've given to strangers, to friends, to this country, we ask you to accept this role." His hands moved with reverence as he pinned the badge to the lapel of her coat. "Head nurse," he said softly. "White House Medical Wing." Emily blinked. Her throat tightened. The badge was cool, but it burned with meaning. A standing ovation rose up around her, polite but sincere. Military officials nodded. Cabinet members clapped. And the president offered her a quiet salute. But Emily didn't raise her arms in triumph. She didn't cry. She simply placed a hand over the badge, grounding herself. She was still the same woman who had once folded blankets in the ER at midnight. The same girl who'd walked home in the dark, giving everything she had without ever asking for more. Only now, the country had noticed, and it was standing with her. The White House Medical Unit was quiet that morning, calm, orderly, but alive with purpose. Emily Daniels stood at the glass-paneled door, adjusting her badge, her first official day as head nurse. The same stethoscope hung around her neck, the one she'd bought secondhand during her first year of training. Her shoes were new, but her posture, her quiet smile, her way of listening before speaking, none of that had changed. Inside the facility gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment and fully staffed personnel, a far cry from the tight resources of Pine Hill. But Emily didn't walk any differently. She still straightened the corners of hospital beds, still asked staff how they were doing, and waited for real answers. Still brought an extra pack of crackers for whoever skipped lunch. The only difference was now, when she acted on kindness, she had the full weight of a nation's respect behind her. She didn't need it, but she would use it to do more for more. Later that day, she sat alone in the break room, quietly writing notes of encouragement to be left in lockers and coat pockets. One for a young medic struggling with burnout. One for a janitor whose mother had just been diagnosed. Small gestures. Big heart. Because that's who she was, not a headline, not a hero, in the way the world often defines it. Just someone who stepped forward when it mattered. And maybe that's the lesson worth sharing. If you've ever met someone like Emily, someone who gave without asking, who showed up when it was hardest, share their story in the comments. Let's remind each other that extraordinary lives are often made up of the quietest moments. Or maybe you've been that person yourself, the one who stood up, reached out, stayed kind. Tell us how you kept going. You never know who needs to hear it today. And if this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more stories that restore faith and reflect real American values: compassion, courage, and community. Like, comment, subscribe. Because in a world that often forgets the quiet ones, we choose to remember them. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.